I need you to step away from those vehicles. Keep your hands visible." "Ma'am, I said hands where I can see them. Now, don't move. Stay right there." "Is there a problem here, officer?" "We're responding to a suspicious person report. Someone matching your description." A concerned neighbor calls 911 on a black woman jogging in her own neighborhood, saying, "She doesn't belong here. She's been casing those cars." As officers arrived, she watched from her window and insisted, "I've never seen her before. Something's not right." But then just one phone call changed everything. The chief judge, U.S. Marshals, the chief of police, and federal courthouse security descended on that parking lot. What happened next left 3 officers suspended, and a federal appellate judge transformed her humiliation into a congressional testimony that would reshape police reform nationwide. Before we continue, write in the comment section where in the world you are watching from. And if you hate seeing people judged before being heard, please subscribe. The alarm sounded at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Naomi Jackson actually needed to wake up. She'd learned decades ago that the extra cushion of time, the psychological space between obligation and action, made the difference between starting a day reactive or starting it sovereign. By 5:50, she was already lacing her running shoes, the muscle memory of 23 years transforming the motion into meditation. 6 o'clock. The front door of her brownstone clicked shut behind her, and the pre-dawn air hit her lungs like a verdict. Clean, cold, final. This was her 5-mile loop, the same route she'd run since purchasing the building in 2013 with her first appellate judge salary. Down Ashworth Street, left on Cathedral, through the tree-lined stretch where old maples formed a canopy that filtered morning light into gold coins, past the boutique shops that wouldn't open for hours, and back up Meridian to home. The routine had carried her through everything. Through her mother's funeral in 2016, when running was the only thing that quieted the grief. Through her first dissenting opinion on qualified immunity, when she'd needed to burn off the rage of being outvoted. Through the loneliness of being one of 3 black women on the 9th Circuit Court, when the weight of representation felt less like honor and more like performance. But this morning was different. This morning, she'd decided on a small rebellion. She would stop for coffee. Naomi checked her watch. 6:38 a.m. Oral arguments started at 10 o'clock, which gave her time. The Common Grounds coffee shop sat at the halfway point of her loop, tucked between a boutique law firm and a gallery selling abstract art to people who understood money better than beauty. She'd passed it hundreds of times, always noting the warm light inside, the scent of espresso bleeding into the street, the promise of pause. Today, she would pause. The discipline that had carried her from public defender, $19,000 a year and a shared desk in a basement office, to federal appellate judge had come at a cost. Every morning at 6. Every case reviewed 3 times. Every opinion drafted with the knowledge that her words would be cited, analyzed, and weaponized by lawyers for generations. Excellence hadn't been optional. It had been armor, but armor was heavy. Naomi pushed through the coffee shop door, the bell chiming her arrival. The barista, a young man with sleeve tattoos and a name tag reading Marcus, smiled without calculation. "What can I get you?" "Large Americano, black," she said, her voice still carrying that judicial economy even in rest. 3 minutes later, she stepped back into the morning with a 16-ounce cup, warming her hands. The parking lot adjacent to the shop held a row of vehicles that probably cost more than her first 3 years of public defender salary combined. A Tesla, a BMW, a Mercedes with vanity plates reading Counsel. She set her coffee on the hood of the Mercedes to check her watch. 6:43, perfect timing. That's when she felt it. The gaze. Not the casual glance of a passing stranger, but the weight of assessment. Naomi looked up and saw the curtain moving in a second-floor window across the street. A face, pale and certain, watching. Naomi picked up her coffee and took a long sip, unbothered. Let them watch. She had a 5-mile loop to finish and a constitutional crisis to adjudicate by noon. She had no idea that within 7 minutes she would become the crisis. Barbara Whitfield had lived in her townhouse for 31 years, long enough to consider herself the neighborhood's unofficial curator of normalcy. From her second-floor window, she had watched the area transform from working-class respectability to affluent exclusivity. The shift marked by the gradual replacement of Chevrolets with German engineering and corner stores with boutique coffee shops that charged $7 for drinks with names she didn't understand. She accepted the changes because they confirmed what she'd always known. This was a good neighborhood. A safe neighborhood. The kind of place where people belonged because they'd earned it. This morning, as she stood at her window with her own coffee, Maxwell House, brewed in a machine she'd owned since 1998, she saw something that disrupted the pattern. A black woman in running clothes, athletic wear, tight and dark, the kind that looked more like performance than modesty. Hair pulled up in a careless bun, natural and untamed. She'd come from the direction of Ashworth Street, moving with the easy confidence of someone who thought she had every right to be there. Barbara watched her enter Common Grounds. Watched her emerge 3 minutes later with a large cup. Watched her set that cup on the hood of Dennis Carmichael's Mercedes. Dennis, the senior partner at Whitmore and Associates, who would be appalled to know someone had used his $40,000 paint job as a coffee table. The woman checked her watch, lingered, looked at the other vehicles with what Barbara could only describe as interest. Something isn't right. The thought arrived with the certainty of arithmetic. Barbara had lived here long enough to know the patterns, to recognize the morning joggers who belonged, Patricia Newhouse in her matching Lululemon sets, Gregory Chen with his AirPods and tech company Gate, the Martinez couple who ran together and always waved. She knew the rhythm of this place, could identify residents by their routines the way some people recognized bird songs. This woman was dissonant. Barbara had never seen her before, not once in 31 years of vigilant observation, and the way she stood there, coffee in hand, surveying those vehicles, it triggered something primal in Barbara's sense of order. The woman wasn't running, wasn't moving. She was loitering, and loitering with purpose looked exactly like casing. Barbara thought about her own car, parked in the resident lot behind her building. She thought about the break-ins that had happened 3 years ago before the neighborhood association installed security cameras. She thought about the news stories she watched every evening, the ones that confirmed her suspicions about the world beyond her window. She thought about responsibility. Her phone was in her hand, for she'd consciously decided to pick it up. Her fingers knew the pattern, 911. The numbers that separated good citizens from passive bystanders. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? Barbara's voice came out steady, certain, wrapped in the authority of civic duty. I need to report a suspicious person. There's a woman loitering in the parking area near Common Grounds coffee shop on Cathedral Avenue. She's been standing near several luxury vehicles, acting unusual. I've never seen her in this neighborhood before. Can you describe her? Barbara looked down at the woman, who was now taking another sip of coffee, still standing by Dennis's Mercedes like she owned the morning. Black woman, maybe late 30s or 40s, athletic clothing. She's just standing there, watching the cars. Something's not right. The dispatcher's tone shifted, became more formal. Is she doing anything threatening? Attempting to break into vehicles? No, but Barbara paused, reaching for language that would convey the certainty she felt. She doesn't belong here. I know this neighborhood, and she's out of place. Better safe than sorry, right? Officers are being dispatched to your location, ma'am. Please stay inside. Barbara ended the call and returned to her window, satisfied. She wasn't being paranoid. She was being prudent. In 31 years, she'd learned to trust her instincts about who belonged and who didn't. Below, the woman finished her coffee, oblivious to the judgment descending on her like weather. Officer David Peterson heard the dispatcher's voice crackle through his radio at 6:49 a.m. Unit 23, we have a suspicious person report at Cathedral and 5th, Common Grounds parking area. Caller reports a black female, late 30s, athletic clothing, loitering near vehicles. Possible casing activity. Peterson was 2 blocks away, finishing a routine patrol through the downtown corridor. He acknowledged the call with professional brevity and redirected his cruiser toward Cathedral Avenue. 12 years on the force had taught him to read between the lines of dispatch calls. Suspicious person in this neighborhood usually meant someone who disrupted the aesthetic, and possible casing activity was often code for doesn't look like they belong here. But protocols were protocols. He'd respond, assess, clear the call. He pulled into the parking lot at 6:52 a.m. and spotted her immediately. Black woman, running gear, standing near a silver Mercedes with a coffee cup in her hand. She looked relaxed, unhurried, like someone finishing a morning routine rather than planning a crime. But Peterson had learned not to trust appearances. Calm people could be dangerous people. Confident people were often guilty people who'd learned to perform innocence. He parked his cruiser at an angle that blocked the parking lot exit and stepped out, his right hand settling instinctively on his holster. Not drawing, just ready. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying that particular frequency of authority that made people stop moving. "I need you to step away from those vehicles. Keep your hands visible." Naomi turned, her expression shifting from peaceful to confused in the span of a heartbeat. She looked at Peterson, then at his hand on his weapon, then back at his face, trying to process the geometry of threat where none should exist. "Officer, is there a problem?" Her voice was measured, calm, the tone she'd perfected over 2 decades of oral arguments. Reasonable, precise, designed to de-escalate through sheer rationality. "Ma'am, I said hands where I can see them. Step away from the vehicles." Naomi raised her hands slowly, the coffee cup still gripped in her right hand, the absurdity of the moment landing like a gavel. "I'm just finishing my morning run. I stopped for coffee. I live 2 blocks from here." Peterson moved closer, his eyes scanning her for weapons, for sudden movements, for anything that would justify the tension coiling in his shoulders. "We received a report of a suspicious person in this area. Someone matching your description." "Suspicious?" Naomi's voice remained level, but something sharper edged into it now. The tone she used when an attorney tried to misrepresent precedent in her courtroom. "I'm drinking coffee in my own neighborhood. What exactly is suspicious about that?" "Ma'am, I need to see some identification." "I don't carry ID when I run. My home is literally 2 blocks away on Ashworth Street. I can walk there right now and show you." "Ma'am, stay where you are." Peterson's hand tightened on his holster. Her insistence on leaving, on controlling the interaction, registered as resistance, as deflection. Innocent people complied. Innocent people didn't try to dictate terms. Naomi felt the shift in his posture, recognized it from 1,000 cases she'd reviewed from the bench. The moment when an officer stopped listening and started enforcing. She'd read transcripts of interactions exactly like this one, had written opinions about the Fourth Amendment implications of stops, based on nothing more than presence and appearance. She'd never imagined she'd be living one. "Officer Peterson," she said, reading his nameplate with the same precision she used for citing case law. "I'm happy to cooperate, but I need you to understand. I'm a federal appellate judge with the Ninth Circuit Court. My name is Naomi Jackson. I live in this neighborhood. I run this route every morning." Peterson's expression didn't change. If anything, his skepticism deepened. He'd heard every excuse, every claim of importance, every attempt to talk a way out of consequences. Doctor, lawyer, CEO, judge. They all said whatever they thought would work. "Ma'am, if you're really a judge, you'll have identification to prove it. Until then, you're matching the description of a suspicious person, and I need to secure this scene." Naomi lowered her hand slowly, the coffee cup forgotten. She understood now, with crystalline clarity, that rationality had no jurisdiction here. Peterson's mind was already made up, and she was about to be treated like every defendant she'd ever sentenced. Naomi tried once more, her voice stripped of everything except fact. "Officer Peterson, I understand you're doing your job. Let me walk to my home. It's 200 feet. 7 Ashworth Street, 2 blocks north. I can show you my identification, my judicial credentials, my mortgage documents if necessary. This can be resolved in 5 minutes." Peterson shook his head, his expression carved from procedure. "Ma'am, you're not going anywhere until I've secured this scene. You match the description of a suspicious person, and I need to ensure there are no weapons." The words hit Naomi like a ruling she hadn't seen coming. "Weapons? I'm in running clothes. Where exactly would I be concealing a weapon?" "Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." Naomi's heart rate spiked, not from fear, but from the recognition of what was about to happen. She'd reviewed hundreds of cases involving stop-and-frisk procedures, had written a blistering dissent on Terry stops that expanded beyond constitutional limits. She knew the law. She knew her rights. She also knew that invoking those rights in this moment would be interpreted as guilt. "Officer, I'm not consenting to a search. I haven't committed any crime. You have no reasonable suspicion." "Ma'am, your refusal to comply is making this situation worse." Peterson's voice hardened into command. "Turn around. Hands on the vehicle. Now." Across the street, Barbara Whitfield watched from her window, vindicated. The woman was resisting. That proved something, didn't it? In the coffee shop, Marcus the barista pressed his phone against the window, recording. 2 other pedestrians slowed their morning walks, their phones already raised. A woman in yoga attire stopped mid-stride, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. Naomi felt the weight of those eyes, the gathering audience that would transform her humiliation into performance. She thought about resisting further, about demanding a supervisor, about reciting case law until Peterson was forced to acknowledge the constitutional violation he was committing. But she'd seen too many videos that ended badly, seen too many names become hashtags. She turned around and placed her hands on the Mercedes, the metal cold against her palms. Peterson approached from behind, his movements methodical. "I'm going to conduct a pat-down search for weapons. Do you have anything sharp on you? Needles? Anything that could hurt me?" "No." The word came out hollow. The search was thorough. Peterson's hands moved down her arms, across her shoulders, along her sides. He checked her waistband, the pockets of her running shorts, small, tight, obviously empty. He patted down her legs, checked her ankles, examined her running shoes. Naomi stood perfectly still, her hands pressed against Dennis Carmichael's $40,000 paint job, and felt every second of the violation. She'd sent people to prison. She'd ruled on the legality of searches more invasive than this one. She'd written opinions that balanced public safety against personal dignity, with the detachment of someone who'd never experienced the latter being stripped away in public. Now she understood what her carefully worded rulings actually felt like. "Ma'am, you need to stop moving," Peterson's voice cut through her thoughts. "I'm not moving." But her hands had trembled, an involuntary response to humiliation. "Ma'am, I need you to remain still. Your behavior is making me concerned for my safety." Marcus was still recording. The crowd had grown to 7 people, maybe 8. Someone would post this online within minutes. Federal judge frisked during morning coffee run. The headlines wrote themselves. Peterson stepped back, apparently satisfied she wasn't armed with anything more dangerous than caffeine and a law degree. "You can lower your hands." Naomi turned to face him, her composure intact but fragile, like a verdict held together by the thinnest precedent. "Am I free to go?" "No, ma'am. We still haven't established your identity, and I'm waiting for backup. I need you to remain here." "Then I'm being detained. For your safety and mine, yes." Naomi felt the trap close. She was being detained without probable cause, searched without reasonable suspicion, held without evidence. Every constitutional protection she'd spent her career defending had evaporated the moment Peterson decided she looked suspicious. She could recite the Fourth Amendment from memory, could explain Terry v. Ohio and its progeny with footnoted precision, but none of it mattered when she was the one standing against the car. The handcuffs came out at 7:03 a.m., exactly 14 minutes after Peterson had first ordered her to step away from the vehicles. Naomi watched him pull them from his belt with the same detached precision she'd used to observe evidence being presented in court, noting the make, the mechanism, the way the metal caught morning light. "Ma'am, for your safety and mine, I'm going to place you in temporary restraints until we can verify your identity." "Officer Peterson, I have not been charged with a crime." "You have no legal basis. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The choice crystallized before her. Comply and be humiliated, or resist and be criminalized. She'd seen this calculation play out in transcripts 1,000 times, had ruled on the reasonableness of force used against people who'd done nothing more than question their detention. She turned around. The first cuff clicked shut around her right wrist, the sound sharp and final as a gavel. The second followed, tighter than necessary, the metal biting into skin that had never felt restraint more serious than a watch band. Peterson checked the fit, double-locked them, she noted with bitter professional recognition, and guided her toward the curb. "Have a seat, ma'am." Naomi looked at the concrete curb, at the gutter with its collection of cigarette butts and dried leaves, at the audience still recording from their various positions of safety. She thought about the last time she'd sat on a curb, maybe when she was 9 years old, eating ice cream outside her grandmother's house in Oakland. She sat. Her coffee cup, abandoned on the Mercedes hood, tipped and fell. 16 ounces of Americano spread across Dennis Carmichael's pristine paint job and cascaded onto the pavement, pooling near her running shoes. $7 wasted. A morning ritual destroyed. Backup arrived at 7:07 a.m. 2 cruisers, lights flashing, transforming a coffee shop parking lot into a crime scene. Officers Ryan Mitchell and Vincent Torres emerged, with the heightened alertness of men responding to potential danger. Peterson met them halfway, his body language communicating both control and caution. Naomi couldn't hear the full briefing, but she caught fragments carried on morning air. Possible prowler, no identification, gave some story about being a judge, uncooperative, had to detain for safety. Mitchell glanced over at Naomi, his expression already shaped by Peterson's narrative. Torres's hand rested on his belt, ready. They approached with the coordinated movement of men who'd worked together before, who trusted each other's assessment of threat. "Ma'am," Mitchell said, stopping a careful distance away. "Officer Peterson says you've been unable to provide identification. Says you claim to be a judge." The way he said it, "claim to be," carried the full weight of disbelief. Naomi recognized the tone. She'd heard it in recordings played during appellate reviews. In the moment before an officer decided someone was lying, the presumption of dishonesty based on nothing more than inconvenient truth. "I am a federal appellate judge with the Ninth Circuit Court," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the absurdity of having to argue her own existence. "My name is Naomi Jackson. I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. I stopped for coffee during my morning run, and Officer Peterson responded to what appears to be a false report." Torres smirked, actually smirked. "A federal judge. In running shorts, no ID. That's creative, I'll give you that. I don't carry identification when I run. Most people don't. It's 2 blocks to my home." "Ma'am, you keep saying that," Peterson interjected, "but you won't provide any way to verify your story. That's why you're sitting here." Mitchell crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with a studied casualness that probably looked like respect to observers, but felt like mockery to Naomi. "Look, ma'am, we get it. You're trying to get out of this situation. But the more you resist, the worse it gets. Just tell us the truth about why you're here, and we can work this out." The truth. Naomi had spent 20 years adjudicating truth from her bench, weighing evidence and testimony with constitutional precision. She'd written opinions that parsed the meaning of words down to their syllables, that found justice in the spaces between statutes. And now 3 officers were telling her that her truth, her documented, verifiable, Senate-confirmed truth, was a lie. She sat on a curb in handcuffs, her wrists already aching, her dignity pooled on the pavement like spilled coffee, and understood with perfect clarity that this was how the system failed, not through malice alone, through certainty. Naomi had been silent for 3 minutes, calculating. She'd spent those minutes watching the officers confer, watching the crowd grow, watching her humiliation become documentation. But silence had its limits, and she'd reached hers. "I'm invoking my right to a phone call." The 3 officers turned to her with varying degrees of amusement. Peterson crossed his arms. Mitchell actually laughed, a short bark of disbelief. Torres shook his head like a teacher disappointed by a student's poor performance. "Ma'am," Peterson said with exaggerated patience, "you're not under arrest. This is just a detention. You don't get a phone call for a detention." Naomi shifted on the curb, the handcuffs forcing her shoulders back in an unnatural posture. When she spoke, her voice changed, dropped the pleading, reasonable tone, and found the frequency that had silenced hundreds of courtrooms. It was the voice that had made seasoned attorneys stumble over their arguments, that had cut through procedural objections like a scalpel through tissue. "Officer Peterson, let me clarify something for you. Under Terry v. Ohio, you may conduct a brief investigative detention based on reasonable suspicion. Such detention must be temporary and last no longer than necessary to confirm or dispel your suspicion. You've searched me. You've found no weapons, no contraband, no evidence of any crime. You've had 14 minutes to verify my identity through dispatch. Instead, you've placed me in restraints." Mitchell's smile faded. Torres stopped leaning against his cruiser. Naomi continued, each word measured and weighted like evidence. "The moment you applied handcuffs, this ceased being a Terry stop and became a de facto arrest. So let me be perfectly clear. Either you have probable cause to charge me with a specific crime, or you have no legal authority to restrain me. Which is it?" The parking lot went quiet. Even the witnesses seemed to hold their breath. Marcus, the barista, had his phone pressed so close to the glass it fogged around the edges. Peterson's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, we're trying to establish your identity." "Then run my name through your system. Naomi Jackson, born March 15, 1979, California driver's license. I've told you my address. I've told you my occupation. If you choose to charge me with a crime, any crime, then I am entitled to legal counsel under the Sixth Amendment, and I am entitled to make that call now. If you choose not to charge me, then you must release me immediately. There is no third option, officer, not in constitutional law." The silence stretched. Naomi could see Peterson processing, weighing the risk of compliance against the risk of escalation. She'd backed him into a corner using nothing but the law he'd sworn to uphold. Torres leaned toward Peterson and muttered something Naomi couldn't hear. Peterson's expression darkened, but he nodded. "Fine," Peterson said, the word sharp as a slammed door. "You get one call, but if this is some kind of game—" "It's not a game, officer. It's the Constitution." Mitchell retrieved her from the curb, pulling her up by the arm with more force than necessary. They walked her to Peterson's cruiser, where he produced his cell phone with obvious reluctance. "One call. Make it quick." Naomi's hands were still cuffed behind her back. "I'll need you to dial the number." Peterson's nostrils flared, but he held the phone up. "What's the number?" Naomi recited it from memory. The direct line to her chambers, the number that bypassed the courthouse switchboard and rang straight through to her law clerk's desk. 202-555-0. Peterson dialed, put the phone on speaker, and held it near her face. 3 rings. Then a familiar voice, crisp and efficient. "Judge Jackson's chambers. Michael Rodriguez speaking." "Michael, it's Judge Jackson." Her voice remained steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I need you to initiate Emergency Protocol Alpha. I'm being detained by local police at Cathedral and 5th Common Grounds parking lot. Contact Chief Judge Rivera immediately. Notify the U.S. Marshals Service. Get courthouse security on standby." A pause. Then Michael's voice, stripped of its usual professional calm. "Judge Jackson, are you safe?" "For now. How long until support arrives?" 30 minutes, maybe less." She heard keyboard clicks, the sound of Michael's training overriding his shock. "Judge, I'm calling Chief Judge Rivera now. Stay on the line if you can." Peterson ended the call with a jab of his thumb, his face pale. "Who the hell did you just call?" Naomi met his eyes with the full weight of judicial authority, no longer diminished by restraints or circumstance. "My law clerk. He's mobilizing federal resources as we speak. I suggest you contact your supervisor, Officer Peterson." "You're bluffing." "In 27 minutes, you'll know for certain." She sat back down on the curb, handcuffs biting into her wrists, and waited for the cavalry to arrive. Michael Rodriguez hung up with Judge Jackson and sat frozen for exactly 4 seconds. The same amount of time it took for his brain to override shock with training. Then his hands moved with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this scenario in orientation but never believed it would happen. First call, Chief Judge Malcolm Rivera, whose private cell number Michael had memorized for exactly this kind of emergency. Rivera answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone who'd spent 40 years navigating federal judiciary politics. Malcolm Rivera. Chief Judge, it's Michael Rodriguez, Judge Jackson's clerk. She's been detained by local police, Cathedral and 5th. She's in handcuffs. The silence lasted 2 heartbeats. Then, say that again. Judge Jackson is in police custody. She called from the scene. She's being held at a coffee shop parking lot. Michael heard something slam, a desk drawer, maybe a car door. Rivera's voice, when it came back, had shed all judicial restraint. Get me Deputy Marshal Washington, now. Then call courthouse security and tell them to send every available unit. I want vehicles, I want personnel, and I want them there before I am. Second call, Deputy U.S. Marshal Keisha Washington, whose number appeared in the emergency contact list under Federal Judicial Protection. She picked up mid-ring, already moving. Washington. Deputy Marshal, this is Michael Rodriguez, law clerk to Judge Naomi Jackson, 9th Circuit. Judge Jackson has been detained by city police during her morning run. She's currently in restraints at Cathedral and 5th. Washington's response was immediate and surgical. Detained or arrested? Detained. No charges filed. She invoked emergency protocol 15 minutes ago. I'm mobilizing a team now. Keep this line open. I need real-time updates if her status changes. Third call. The one Michael dreaded. Police Chief Raymond Butler's office number listed in the courthouse directory under Local Law Enforcement Liaison. The receptionist answered with practiced cheer. Chief Butler's office, how may I? This is Michael Rodriguez, law clerk to Federal Judge Naomi Jackson. I need Chief Butler immediately. It's an emergency involving one of his officers and a member of the federal judiciary. The cheer evaporated. One moment. Butler came on the line 30 seconds later, his voice carrying the wary tension of someone expecting bad news. This is Chief Butler. Chief Butler, I'm calling to inform you that Judge Naomi Jackson, Federal Appellate Judge, 9th Circuit Court, has been detained by 3 of your officers at Cathedral and 5th. She's currently in handcuffs. Chief Judge Rivera is en route with federal marshals. I'm calling as a courtesy to allow you to get ahead of this situation. Michael heard what might have been a choked sound. Then, which officers? Judge Jackson mentioned Peterson. I believe there are 2 others. Jesus Christ. Butler's voice dropped to something between fury and horror. I'm leaving now. Tell Judge Jackson. Tell her I'm handling this personally. The calls took 7 minutes total. By minute 8, the machinery of federal authority had begun moving with inexorable force. Chief Judge Rivera's black SUV pulled out of his driveway in Georgetown, his wife shouting questions he didn't stop to answer. His phone was already dialing the circuit's administrative officer. The words clipped and furious. Naomi Jackson is in handcuffs. I need documentation of her credentials, judicial ID, Senate confirmation records, everything, sent to my phone in the next 5 minutes. Deputy Marshal Washington assembled her team in the federal courthouse garage with the speed of someone coordinating a threat response. 4 marshals, 2 vehicles, full credentials displayed. They rolled out at 7:19 a.m., sirens clearing traffic like a presidential motorcade. Police Chief Butler sat in his office for exactly 10 seconds after Michael's call, his mind racing through the catastrophic implications. A federal judge, his officers, handcuffs. The news cycle would eat this alive. He grabbed his keys, radioed dispatch, and ordered every available supervisor to Cathedral and 5th immediately. Courthouse security. 3 vehicles, 8 personnel. received their orders from the circuit's chief of security. One of our judges is detained. I want a perimeter. I want documentation. And I want witness statements from every civilian in that parking lot. By 7:22 a.m., 6 different convoys were moving toward a single point on the map. Federal vehicles with emergency lights, police command cars, courthouse security SUVs. They came from different directions, different chains of authority united by a single purpose: retrieve a federal judge from a parking lot curb. In that parking lot, Naomi sat in handcuffs, watching Peterson pace and check his radio with increasing frequency. She could see it in his body language, the realization that something was wrong, that the timeline he'd expected wasn't holding. She checked the clock on the bank across the street. 7:24 a.m. 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The cavalry was coming. The black SUV arrived at 7:27 a.m., pulling into the parking lot with the controlled urgency of federal authority. Chief Judge Malcolm Rivera emerged before the vehicle had fully stopped, his judicial credentials already in hand, held high like a warrant that brooked no argument. He was 73 years old, silver-haired, and carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd spent 4 decades commanding courtrooms. Officers Peterson, Mitchell, and Torres turned toward him instinctively, recognizing power even if they didn't yet understand its source. I am Chief Judge Malcolm Rivera, United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. His voice carried across the parking lot with courtroom acoustics, designed to reach the back row and compel attention. You are currently detaining Judge Naomi Jackson, Federal Appellate Judge of the Ninth Circuit Court. Release her immediately. Peterson's face underwent a transformation that would have been comedic if the circumstances weren't devastating. Color draining from his cheeks, his mouth opening and closing without sound, his eyes darting between Rivera's credentials and Naomi sitting on the curb. Sir, we were responding to a suspicious person. I don't care what you were responding to. Rivera's words cut like a gavel striking marble. You have handcuffed a sitting federal judge based on a phone call from a concerned citizen. Remove those restraints now, or I will have U.S. Marshals remove them for you. As if summoned by invocation, Deputy Marshal Keisha Washington's convoy arrived. 2 vehicles disgorging federal law enforcement with the precision of a tactical operation. Washington herself moved directly to Naomi, her credentials displayed, her expression locked somewhere between professional calm and barely restrained fury. Mitchell fumbled for his keys. His hands shook as he unlocked Naomi's handcuffs, the metal clicking open with a sound that echoed louder than it should have. The restraints fell away, leaving angry red marks circling both wrists like evidence. Washington knelt beside Naomi, her voice low and careful. Judge Jackson, I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Keisha Washington. Are you injured? I'm fine. Naomi's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she brought them forward, examining the marks with clinical detachment. With your permission, I need to photograph those injuries for documentation. Naomi extended her wrists. Washington's camera clicked 6 times, each flash preserving evidence that would appear in reports, legal filings, and eventually congressional testimony. The marks would fade in days, but the photographs would last forever. Police Chief Raymond Butler's car arrived at 7:31 a.m., 4 minutes behind Rivera, and visibly too late. He emerged with the expression of a man watching his career dissolve in real time. His eyes found Naomi, still sitting on the curb, and something in his face crumbled. "Judge Jackson," he said, his voice stripped of everything except raw apology. I can't. Save it." Rivera stepped between them like a judicial buffer. "Right now, Chief Butler, You need to secure this scene and remove these officers from duty pending a full investigation." Butler's jaw clenched. He turned to Peterson, Mitchell, and Torres, who stood frozen in a tableau of dawning horror. "Badges, all three of you, now." "Chief, we were just—" Peterson started. "I said now." The three officers unpinned their badges with varying speeds. Peterson slow and disbelieving, Mitchell mechanically efficient, Torres with hands that shook worse than Mitchell's had moments before. Butler collected each one like evidence of institutional failure. "You're suspended pending investigation. Report to Internal Affairs at 0900 tomorrow. Leave your service weapons with your watch commander. Go." They left like men walking toward execution, their cruisers pulling away as more federal vehicles filled their spaces. The parking lot had transformed from crime scene to federal operation, with courthouse security establishing a perimeter and marshals documenting everything. Across the street, Barbara Whitfield watched from her window with growing unease. The woman she'd reported, the suspicious prowler who didn't belong, was being treated like visiting royalty. Federal credentials flashed. Men in suits conferred. The word judge carried through morning air with the weight of condemnation. At 7:49 a.m., 2 federal agents knocked on her door. They were polite, professional, and utterly uninterested in her explanations about neighborhood safety and civic duty. They took her statement with the clinical efficiency of people documenting a case they'd already solved. By 8:00 a.m., Barbara understood that she hadn't protected her neighborhood, she'd assaulted it. In the parking lot, Naomi finally stood, assisted by Deputy Marshal Washington. Chief Judge Rivera placed a hand on her shoulder with grandfatherly concern. "Let's get you home, Naomi." She looked at the coffee shop, at the spilled Americano dried on the pavement, at the crowd of witnesses still recording. She thought about the humiliation, the violation, the 27 minutes in handcuffs. Then she thought about the hundreds of cases she'd yet to hear, the opinions she'd yet to write, the testimony she'd deliver before Congress in 6 weeks with these photographs as exhibits. "Not home," she said quietly. "Courthouse. I have oral arguments at 10. Rivera's eyebrows rose. "Naomi, after what you've been through, especially after what I've been through." Naomi walked into her courtroom at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes before oral arguments were scheduled to begin. The attorneys already seated in the gallery did a double-take. They'd heard rumors, seen social media posts, maybe caught morning news alerts about a federal judge detained during a coffee run. But here she stood, robed and composed, ascending to the bench as if the morning had been unremarkable. Deputy Marshal Washington stood at the courtroom door, a silent reminder that federal authority now surrounded Judge Jackson like armor. "All rise. The United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit is now in session. The Honorable Judge Naomi Jackson presiding." She sat. The courtroom sat. And then she looked at the case file before her. Martinez v. City of Oakland. A Section 1983 civil rights claim. Police misconduct. Excessive force during a traffic stop. The plaintiff alleged officers had handcuffed him without probable cause, searched him without reasonable suspicion, and ignored his assertions of innocence. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. "Counsel," Naomi said, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience, "let's proceed." The city's attorney rose, confident in his qualified immunity defense, prepared to argue that the officer's actions were reasonable under the circumstances. He made it 3 minutes into his argument before Naomi interrupted. "Counsel, you're asking this court to find that handcuffing your client, who had committed no crime, who matched no specific description, who posed no articulable threat, was a reasonable investigatory detention. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Under Terry, I'm familiar with Terry, counsel. What I'm asking is whether you truly believe that restraining a citizen in handcuffs for 27 minutes in full public view, based solely on an anonymous tip, and the officer's subjective discomfort with his presence constitutes a reasonable seizure under the Fourth Amendment. The attorney hesitated, suddenly aware that something fundamental had shifted in Judge Jackson's approach. Your Honor, officer safety is a legitimate concern that must be balanced against constitutional protections. Continue your argument. I'll reserve ruling. But everyone in that courtroom knew how she would rule. Her written opinion, filed 3 weeks later, became Jackson versus Martinez, 63 pages of surgical legal reasoning that dismantled qualified immunity defenses built on nothing more than officer discretion and subjective fear. It was cited in 17 appellate decisions within 6 months, reshaped police training protocols in 4 states, and became required reading in civil rights law courses nationwide. The photographs of her wrists appeared as footnote 17. 6 weeks after the detention, Naomi sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee in Washington, her hands folded on the witness table, the faint yellow-green bruises still visible if you knew where to look. Senator Patricia Daniels leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. Judge Jackson, can you describe for this committee what it felt like to experience the law from the other side of your bench? Naomi had prepared for this question, had rehearsed measured responses that would thread the needle between personal grievance and systemic critique. But sitting there, with cameras recording and senators waiting, she abandoned the script. It felt like betrayal, she said quietly. Not betrayal by those officers specifically, but betrayal by a system I've spent 20 years trying to perfect. I have ruled on hundreds of Fourth Amendment cases. I have parsed the meaning of reasonable suspicion and probable cause with what I believed was appropriate rigor. But I had never understood the violence of being presumed guilty, the humiliation of having your truth dismissed as deception. The helplessness of knowing the law protects you in theory, while 3 officers prove it doesn't in practice. She paused, gathering herself. I was lucky. I had credentials to invoke, resources to mobilize, federal authority to summon. Most people don't. They sit on that curb and no cavalry comes. That's the system we've built, and that's the system this committee has the power to reform. The legislation that passed 4 months later, the Federal Judicial Protection and Police Accountability Act, bore her testimony like bedrock. 3 months after that, on a Tuesday morning in early November, Naomi laced her running shoes and stepped out at 6 o'clock a.m. Same route, same 5-mile loop. She'd missed only 4 days of running since the incident, refusing to let fear redesign her rituals. When she reached common grounds, she paused, ordered the same Americano, stepped into the parking lot, and stood near the same Mercedes, now belonging to someone else, but parked in the identical spot. A patrol car rolled past slowly. The officer inside, young, maybe 25, with a nameplate reading Hayes, made eye contact. Naomi tensed instinctively, muscle memory preparing for confrontation. But Officer Jordan Hayes simply nodded, a gesture of recognition, of respect, the kind that acknowledged shared space without presuming threat. Naomi nodded back. She finished her coffee, resumed her run, and understood something she hadn't before. Justice wasn't the dramatic arrival of federal marshals or the satisfying click of handcuffs being removed. Justice was this: a morning run uninterrupted, a nod of respect freely given, A system slowly, painfully learning what it should have known from the beginning. Justice was won not in moments, but in miles. One morning at a time.